Hi, everybody. Welcome. On behalf of EFMA, a warm welcome to Rudradeb. As one of the experts of the EFMA Advisory Services, Rudradeb will share his expertise today with you on AI and more precisely, how AI can help in creating new opportunities for banks in times of crisis. Welcome.
Thank you, Doreen. So first of all, thanks a lot for everyone to joining. Shall we wait for a minute or we can just start already?
You can start.
Cool. So I presume everyone can see my screen now. I'll make it full mode. Awesome. Thanks a lot for joining. For everyone from different parts of the world. So today I'll be talking about how AI can create new opportunities for banks during the current crisis. So before I start, I thought it could be interesting to give some background about myself, those of who may not know me. So I started working on AI way back in 2002. So my first part of my professional life was purely working as an AI engineer. I worked for, even at that time, for some banks and financial institutions building AI software actually in 2005 and 6 in Belgium. And I also published some research papers. So, and then I made a transition from that life to being an entrepreneur. From 2010 to 17, I built a few companies, including one of the company was on insurance tech startup. I will briefly talk about some of the learnings that I had from that experience also. And then in the last 3 years, I switched to, I perhaps prefer to call myself an educator, so I kind of write a lot. I wrote a book also on creating value with AI. I speak a lot. I'm also a mentor of different organizations, including Google Launchpad. And currently one of my focus areas is using AI for social good and how can we use AI for solving real world problems. So that's about me. So about the content for today, I have broken down into 3 main parts. So the first is, what is AI in the banking sector? And I am answering this question after one of the participants asked this question, that he would like to touch upon that. And I presume many of you would have the same question. Not everyone comes from a technical background. Then I will talk about some of the opportunities and with some use cases. I will not go in very details, so feel free to ask me if you want any further details during the call as a question, or even during the talk. Just feel free to ask that question if someone wants to go a bit more in depth about some of the use cases. I will also bring examples from actually banks, and I haven't taken any example from other sectors. I will, if there are some use cases that I came across from different banks, I will talk about that too. And the final part, I will talk about some of the overcoming challenges. And this is something what I have seen over the last few years, talking to various banks as well as different organizations in the world, that although they have idea, they end up building products, they end up having problems with adoption and product development. And I want to also touch upon this topic because this is something I've heard many times from many banks actually. So that's the open tech for today. So to start with, basically in AI as an what's an AI is. So AI, of course, the background goes back to 1940s and 50s, and it's nothing new technology, and it has existed for many decades, right? And it has a different kinds of algorithms, right? You have rule-based systems, you have heuristic algorithms, evolution algorithms. But what we hear a lot in the last 4 or 5 years is machine learning. And in the machine learning, again, you can classify into 3 different kinds of algorithms: supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement. What is most interesting is only the machine learning, supervised and unsupervised learning. And that what perhaps captures almost all the real world cases that you in banking sector you will come across. There are some rule-based expert systems that banks have used, but they have their own problems. And I will bring one of the use case talking about that particular expert system. So what are these supervised and unsupervised learning? In short, a supervised learning is something where you already have the data. That means you know input and output, and you're training the machine based on existing data from the past that is already knows what is the input and what is the output, and you're training the model. And unsupervised learning is basically where you don't have the output, you only have, let's say, a set of data, and you want to understand certain patterns in the data. That's are the two cases. And overall, what we are talking about in machine learning is a set of algorithms that learns patterns in the data. That's why it is so data ends up being so key in these kind of algorithms, because it analyzes the data to understand the patterns. And why can that be useful in banking sector or any sector is because there are patterns in everything that we do. How we buy, what we wear, what even keeps us engaged, what we like, everything has a pattern. So if somehow we can model those patterns, we will know we can predict and we can engage the people more. And not only humans, but even IT systems have patterns in when a system fails. So we can, in fact, systems are able to predict watching certain patterns that, okay, the system might end up failing in next weeks or maybe even few days. So that's pretty much about machine learning and AI. So the question is that, okay, there are these, if we can train a machine to learn certain patterns, how does that connect to the opportunities in this crisis? And many of you most likely have heard a lot of use cases. So most likely you might hear it twice, but I just have to go through the different opportunities that I think that are out there for banks around the world. So what happens in this kind of crisis, if you read about the crisis in 2008 and 9 or any other financial crisis in the past or in general economic crisis, is these are the great times for companies, because many companies who could survive, they end up having, there is a lack of competition. So let's say when there is a huge boom, the fintech startups, and especially a lot of banks compete with fintech startups and what they are providing, get a lot of investment, and that's not always good for the banks. But these times, and unfortunately, again, fintech startups will many of them will go bust, but they also will have problems with funding. That will suffer, of course, the product development. And this is where a lot of banks can actually capitalize on, either through acquiring those fintech startups or working with them, or even building in-house products that these fintech startups were building. The second opportunity that banks would have in this kind of current environment is that you will be able to build a trust and empathy and loyalty if you could provide the right services to your customers. To my understanding, one of the biggest problem in banking sector is trust, that people do not trust. And so if, given the situation people are in now, if you could provide them the right and product, services, support, you could gain back the trust and empathy and loyalty, which is, I think, is very valuable for many banks in the world. The third thing is that because of the lockdowns and other aspects that's happening, people are going to change behaviors, or are being forced to change behaviors. And if you read about sales books, and they always say that the best time for people to buy things or provide them something when they're changing their behaviors. So you could be able to adapt your products and services to satisfy what the new behaviors that these customers will have, and you will have much easier possibility for them to use those products, just because they are forced to change your user behavior. The fourth is, of course, you should will be focusing on increasing the efficiency, and this is a great time also, given there would be problems with the funds and the money. So it's a great time to focus on increasing the efficiency. And the final opportunity is to improve your in-house capability and upskill the employees, which is also very important, given the new technologies, especially also with doing certain increasing the efficiency in-house. You might want to retrain certain employees to the new technologies. So these are the few of those 6 or 5 opportunities that I thought were some of the biggest opportunities that banking sector or banks can utilize, given the current environment that they have. So now I will go into each of those points in a bit more detail, and touch upon some of the potential use cases and show what are those mean in terms of actual concrete actions. So the first one is capitalize on the reduced competition from the fintech. So when we look at the fintech industry, of course there are plenty of fintech startups, but I think the three main focus of what fintech companies, a lot of those companies are doing, where banking sector has huge benefits if they are able to tap into that products or that they are building, is one is a financial inclusion, one is identifying fraud and money laundering, and the third is a smart insurance premiums. And I may have missed a few more, but these are the three that came to my mind naturally, that these have a quite big impact that banks can, if they end up building those products, could provide to their customers. So what does each of those mean? So first of all, the financial inclusion. So traditionally, of course, banks, the lending procedure keeps out a lot of people, primarily, let's say, the people who don't have a bank account, but also for other reasons. They may not have a great banking record. They may have other things that keeps them away from getting a good terms in loans. And but there are other ways and other metrics that fintech startups, for example, have been using to get rid of this traditional way of making a decision whether to give a loan to someone or not. So I was, in fact, working with one of the kind of startup, and the features that we were looking at was beyond the banking industry, with what, for example, the cost of living, the job title, the area of living, and there are a few more features, and that depends on the country that you are in, what feature set makes sense to look at. But it makes intuitive sense for many experts to say that yes, the traditional way of looking at the way we give loans and the way we decide to whether to give loan to someone or not may not be applicable. And again, in this kind of given context environment where I think a lot of people is going to suffer, unfortunately, this is a great place to look at that. Can we build new models where we can potentially give loans to people where on other metrics? And there are many startups are actually have looked at this problem, and they have kind of built some models on that. So banks can kind of focus on that aspect and see, okay, we can partner with certain fintech companies, or maybe even build their own in-house tools. So the second thing is about identifying fraud and money laundering. Again, a big problem for many banks. And traditionally, when I came across some of the tools that banks have been using, they're not that efficient because a lot of those provide a false positives, which basically means that in many cases, people who are flagged as a potential fraud or is actually not a fraud. And normally banks perhaps were okay because they are risk averse, so they said, okay, it's better for us to go for. It's okay to give more false positives. But again, this is not the ideal results that you'd like to have, because they were also relying on some rule-based. And as I said, one of the systems that they were using certain rules to identify the frauds. The new startups that are coming, and some of them have solved this, they look at the behavior-based monitoring. So instead of looking at some predefined rules or certain rules that they're learning, they're trying to understand the behaviors and how a fraudulent behavior looks like, and how does someone who is doing a money laundering looks like. And I'm not going to go, as I said, going to go into much details, but I will give one example which Bank in Russia have used, is that one of the problems that they had is when people are traveling, which I often faced, is when I'm traveling and I'm using my card might often get blocked because some of the banks consider using an ATM or traveling to another part of the world and using it seen as a fraudulent behavior. So the way they get rid of that is by saying that, okay, there are a group of people who are also able to carry out their operations through other banks. And that for them is not then this group of people should not be identified as a fraudulent. So what they did is they looked at the user behavior, the behavior of certain group of people, and say, okay, if this is the behavior pattern, then we can identify. So, and this is something that you can learn. So again, that's where the AI and machine learning comes in. That these patterns you don't have to define as predefined it. you might be able to learn this by seeing what are the past experiences have been, what are the past fraudulent behaviors have been. You just train the data, and the machine learns those behaviors. And again, many fintech companies have worked on this problem, so it's a good idea to perhaps go and look at what other startups are doing, or even work with some of those to solve this. The third is working on providing a smart insurance, and this is again a big place where there's so much innovation is a room for innovation, and again, so many startups have been, fintech companies have been going into, and I had myself a startup which was looking into driving, for example, and by far young people were penalized of their driving insurance, because driving insurance is again traditionally dependent on how many years of driving experience or how many years of driving license you have, for example. And that may not be the best way to look at it in a given world. So what we did ended up was looking at driving behavior, how people are behaving or how they are driving, rather than how many years they have driven. And of course, banks and insurance companies were quite interested in that. And again, both the health as well as driving behavior is something that people can look at and redefine the insurance that you are doing. Another way, and I spoke with one of the companies, startups actually, fintech startups, is they were perhaps you can use a social proof. A social proof could be either your existing behavior in social network, which is quite easy to find. But if you don't want to go into the privacy issues, you could also use the network that you have. What is the kind of network that you are having in social media, and for example, or in general in real life. So you can rely on the social proof to define the premiums or reduce the risk of analyzing some of the premiums that you're calculating for certain groups of people. Primarily, again, the young population is who's going to benefit from out of this kind of new ways of calculating insurance. And these are the three things that I thought could be quite interesting for to look at. And again, there are many companies, so startups who are solving that, and so banks can capitalize on this given moment to reinvent or to kind of partner with this kind of work and solve some of these problems. The second point, which I said about opportunities, is that you can use renewed trust, empathy, and loyalty to your customers, which is, I think, absolutely important given the current moments we are in, but also going forward in future. I was listening to a talk by I think Mark Benhoff, or Mark Cuban actually, and he was saying the future of businesses will not be purely money driven. It will be also, a lot of that will be impact driven. People will be more conscious about what the services and products they are providing to them, and I think that's something that a lot of banks have to incorporate in the products and services that they're giving to their customers. So one of the so I was reading a few of the articles, and I like the quote that was there, and it's kind of reiterates what I said, that the focus is, rather than how could you earn more, then how can you help a business survive in this kind of environment? And the question that you guys need to think about, that what can we build? What are the services that we can provide and products that could help a business save the business? And or help the business actually. And I brought up this example that I came across from Bank Colombia, which is they have launched something called Plink. And it is like a year ago or something, but that's quite relevant in today's environment. So what they were doing was they're providing the information to so there were two sides of the Plink. There's one is the end customers, and another was like individual customers, and then there was this small businesses. So both of them, they were providing value through this system. What they were doing is the small businesses, through the Plink system, they're providing them the health of the business, how are their sales evolving, who their customers are. So they were getting a lot of smart analytics information about their business, but they also helped provide the right customers for a given product get the information. So they were also pushing the right offer to the right customers from the small businesses. So in this way, because at the end, people will still buy things. It's not that people will stop buying things. It's just, if you could provide them the right information, the right product to the right people, they will buy. So it was ended up having benefit from both the sides, and both were actually quite happy. And they did an NPS score which was 9.2, which is I thought was quite a high score from a bank product. Actually, I mean, given that in 3 months that was the NPS score that they had achieved. I think it's a great product. This kind of idea is something a lot of banks can utilize. Then the third point that I was talking about is how can you adapt to the new behavior. So, of course, people are changing their behaviors, and I don't need to repeat it, but we all know that people are becoming more mobile devices, and they're going to be more, using remotely solutions. In fact, in one of those, I read that people are not even going to use ATMs. I'm not sure how will that be, but there's more and more people will stop using ATM and not use the device to touch. And even in the past, even before this whole epidemic came, studies have shown that like if you could build personalization and people are changing their behaviors, they're using more and more remote devices and mobiles. So you will now have really individual data about those people. You know who is this person. You know what are they using, how are they using it, and that's a super interesting data point for you to create personalization to these people. So some data points have even shown that if you build personalization, 49% of the customers end up buying more. And there are fewer returns. Only 5% of the impulse purchases were returned. And the loyalty increases by 44%. 44% of the customers said they will buy more, or they will repeat the same behavior if this is personalized. So you can imagine how important it is now in the given moment when people are more and more moving to the digital devices, so much more important to build the personalization so that you could provide them the value and you also benefit. So again, here I start off giving an example that what can that be personalization mean? I mean, there are many ways you can create personalization, of course, from the user interface to the right products. But one of the banks, Bank, actually, they had built something called the marketing brain. Marketing brain was the idea was to provide the right offer to the right customer at the right time. And how they were doing that, they're analyzing the customer data, and they were not only analyzing the customer data, but they also keep on learning from the customer responses that they were having. And in a year, they found out that by providing this kind of personalized environment, they were able to achieve around 1 million products over the last year. So hugely, they improved their their sales. And again, so these were all there, but given the current move, people who were not in the past, and many of your banks may have a large group of people who normally would not use digital products are now going to use digital products. So that's a much more incentive for you guys to now go and build those products. And I think this kind of behavior change is going to stay even if after the pandemic. And this is often also happens that people's behavior, when they change to something, and if it's for a decent amount of time, they don't change back to the old behavior. Not everyone. So you will still have a lot of people continuing being in this behavior of using more and more digital product. So it completely makes sense now to go into this direction and utilize this opportunity that you are getting. The fourth point was you can increase your efficiency. And of course, the first point is automation. And many of you might already have explored. RPAs have been around for many times. It's basically to mimic what human interaction is all about. And there are tools for that, already existing tools. You don't even have to, I put some of them, none of them I have worked for, just to let you know. I just think these are some of the tools, but there are plenty of such tools. So this is a standard anyway for you guys companies. Okay, there are a lot of work, there are a lot of things that is could be automated. Great time to go and start automating it because it will help you drive the cost low. And that's something, I mean, again, could be expedited at this given moment, helping to reduce the cost. So there, I now gave you some examples about what are those opportunities that you guys could have potentially given the current environment, and how could you build products or utilize these opportunities to increase your not only revenues but also loyalty and overall the products that you're building. So, but the next thing is that one of the things that I briefly mentioned in the beginning, that it is not, a lot of banks over the last years have said that The biggest challenge when they face with AI is not necessarily on the products, actually on building the products. It often ends up being adoption. And in some ways now, given people are changing their behavior, given the environments, it would much help you guys to kind of make people adopt the products. Because in a way, they're, I will not say use the forced, but they are much more inclined to use this kind of more products more and more because the environment that we are in. But I still will say that when you are building these products, you have to be very conscious about that to make sure that this is a product that people are going to adopt and going to use it. And it's very difficult given 1/3 of the people still believe AI is a threat to humanity. So you can imagine that large population still think that it's a threat, so they're not going to use it. So how can you build such products that people would trust naturally and would kind of make people adopt, even in these current environments when they're kind of inclined more to use it? So I think these are things that I've learned from my previous startups, and the things that what I've learned is that first of all, whenever you are building a product, if you want people to use it, especially in the AI, because you're getting the data from those people, you're using the data, you have to give them an intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. You have to provide them the right, understand their motivation and cater to that motivation. That whatever is their intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So in my case, I was just giving this example of the startup that I had built in the past, which was around getting insurance premiums for young drivers based on their driving behavior. And what we saw that intrinsic motivation was be a better driver, improve the roads better. So that was the intrinsic motivation. And the extrinsic motivation was reduce your premiums. And given, again, in this environment, I think there's a lot of people have very high intrinsic motivation. They want to do good to the world. They want to be more green, which, let's say, even 3 months ago, a lot of people would not naturally think of going green, but now they're more conscious about the environment, the world, the people. So they have a very high intrinsic motivation. So it's a great time to connect to those motivations and your product and market in a way so that they are going to use it. But you definitely have to connect to those motivations. The second thing, which I always say, is that you still have to educate users. You cannot push products up to your users without informing them in a proper way, not through very complicated terms of agreements or something. And in our case, what we did is we actually sent physical letters to people. But you guys could think about how could we simplify to educate users. It could be through social media, but doesn't have to be. How could you simplify the communication that you are doing? But that's absolutely essential, especially in AI products, that you are educating the users that benefits, what are the value they're getting out of this. The third thing that I've also learned very much is that you cannot force people to use it. And again, I understand that the current environments makes people more inclined, but still you have to give people the choice so that they feel they are in control. And this is an example that I'm giving about between two devices that we had. One side is an app where people can choose whether they want to their trip to be recorded, versus a device that people are adding up in their car, which they don't have a choice of whether they want their trip to be recorded or not. And people want to be in choice. So often when you're building AI products, be conscious about providing them this option. The fourth is that, and again, I'm saying this very interesting because I'm saying don't try to change behaviors. It doesn't work. But people, if they're forced to change behavior, like current environments are forcing people to change behavior, so your services should help them make the change or help them stay in that change behavior. But don't try to change the behavior of people. It's very difficult to work, and I would always recommend that a lot of AI systems that people adopt are trying to change behaviors of people, which again, I think is quite a big mistake. And I've written on this is an article that was in FMA website. So just kind of you can go through more if you are more interested to learn about what are those different ways you could make user adoption. And before the final topic that I want to talk about is the product development. And again, this is a topic that I've heard many times from banks, and that's why I thought about it. When you are given the environment that you are in, there are opportunities that you can capture. You have to provide the right incentive to your users, but you also have to build the right products. Because otherwise everything else falls apart. And especially for AI product development, you have to be super careful about not having biases in your system. And I'm just giving some examples of what has happened at Amazon in the building products which were sexist in hiring process, or there was in the care for the patients in the US for $200 million. which was actually deciding what type of care to give based on the cost of the healthcare that someone is going to spend. So it ended up being more biased against the Black and African Americans, because they normally, unfortunately, are more poor, so they spend less. So you have to be also very careful about when you're building this kind of system, is that is there an inherent bias that you're adding up? And the way that I would recommend to solve that problem, just to give you some more data about that, what we have seen that 80% of the data science projects never end up in production. And one of the reasons of that is definitely this biases and the lack of adoption. So you have to be very careful about when you are capturing this the environments, the products that you're building. You also have to be careful about making sure the adoption as well as the biases are not there. And one of the ways that I have argued, and I've worked on this extensively over the last year or so, is the way to remove biases is to use a very collaborative environment of building products. So even let's say in-house you're building a product in the bank, often what I've seen that when banks are building some AI products, the product is limited to the innovation department. And the innovation department are engineers, most likely male in their mid-20s or 30s, and they're building products disconnected from the customers from other departments. If you are building a product, no matter how good is that, if that's the way you're building it, you end up building biases, you will end up having much lower adoption. So you have to include different people and collaboratively work together to build it. I will give you an example. How could you do that? Because it sounds really nice, and people think, oh, it's an idea that really well, but how could actually it work out? So and here comes my fifth point of retraining the employees. So what happened that, especially in the AI world, what banks can do really now is that because of the automation, some people might be losing the job or will have their jobs being lost because the machines will take over. What you could do is incentivize your employees to do online courses, and there's plenty of online courses that you can retrain them, and you don't require them to expensive courses. They are free, and you just incentivize them to go train it. Even someone with a different background, completely from a non-technical background, can learn these tools and then create a team with these people who are actually learning online, at the same time building a product, working with other engineers in your team. So in this way, you're naturally creating an environment within the bank where different people from different departments who are learning given, let's say, AI and machine learning, but at the same time come from a different background, they have an incentive to be part of the team because they're learning, but also creating a product, including the ideas what everyone have. So if you're building the product, definitely have to include people which is from a diverse team, include them. Hopefully people who are also learning the machine learning and AI, give them the incentive structure to do that. So, and I think this is a great time to do these kind of things, because as I said, a lot of people would love to get retrained, this is a good time for people to get new skills, and also for you guys to kind of create this kind of new products that you have, and you can experiment with new things. And that's where comes the lean product development. Also, what often I've also seen banks is end up doing a very, they often going to build a very big product and launch spending a lot of money, and you don't need to. You have to bring the startup mentality of doing something test, launch ready, and hopefully if you end up working with some of the fintech startups, that ideas that I said in the beginning, you will end up integrating those kind of processes in-house while building the product. And this is absolutely important in the field of AI, that you follow these kind of practices. Before I end, I don't know how long it went, but before I end, I want to touch upon one final comment that I again have heard many times, is about return of investment. And typically banks often, this is I think one of the most common questions that I've heard, that okay, we can go and build these products, and which could perhaps create more engagement, maybe more trust, and some of the inclusion, but is there a return of investment? And I'm just taking quotes from two people from the banking industry, so that you could kind of connect to that. Is from someone from National Bank of Kuwait says that the focus has to be how we serve our customers, especially in these times. It's not about how can you make money from customers, but how can you serve the customers given they are going to have difficult times, and how could you build products that are serving them. And banks need to stop looking at short-term success. Is not what banks need, is Frederick said from the RAB Bank. And this is absolutely true at this given point, that in the next 6 months to a year, I doubt that there could be an immediate short-term return for things that I mentioned. But I think there's a huge long-term and mid-term returns for these things. That if you could go to the right thing, right bill, provide the structure to the banks, to your customers, there's a huge opportunity for doing that. So yeah, I'm sorry, this is a different Q&A. I will just remove the last link, but thanks for listening to me, and I'm happy to take any questions that you guys may have to me. Pardon.
So in the question and answer window, we had actually a few questions. I don't know, Radeb, if you see them, or should I just try and read them to you?
Okay. Yeah, I can read it.
Okay, so we can, first one is, how can social proof be trusted?
How can, I'm sorry, I cannot see the question. So can you repeat, how can what?
How can social proof be trusted?
By trusted by whom? I mean, can you elaborate the question a bit?
Okay, I can try to allow to talk the participant that asked the question. Maybe he actually asked, or she, I'm sorry, I don't know, 2 questions. So.
Okay.
Milan, can you talk? Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was, I wanted to ask about the social proof. You had a point there that we can analyze the people based on their social media profile. That's how I understood it?
One of the ways, not only. Social proof doesn't only mean social media. Social proof could also include their families, like friends, or maybe say immediate family, and looking at what their behavior has been. So it doesn't necessarily only mean social media.
And this behavior is based on what kind of data?
It could be even the banking behavior. I mean, it depends. I mean, every context is different, but let's say that a child or a young youth's proof could check at their parents' behaviors, or their parents, how they are behaving. So that could give you an indication of the child's. Mm-hmm. And financial data, okay. I'm even talking about, could be behavioral, could be financial, both financial and non-financial, but it could be just financial too.
And my other question is, do you know any use cases for saving, how AI could be used in saving programs, or how to improve customer experience? Do you know any examples, or? Yeah,
I mean, customer experiences, I briefly, customer experience personalization is part of the customer experience, let's say, right? So when I touch upon the personalization, that people are getting the right deal, what they want, the product that they get it, that's personalization, that's customer experience. That would be, to me, the first place of customer experience. And I gave you this example of the bank-ish bank, what they're doing, or even Bank Colombia, what they're doing with Blink is providing the right product to the right people. Is that what you mean, or you would mean by customer experience also in terms of an app experience?
That answered my question. But do you have any such case for saving programs? Or financial literacy?
I do know some startups. About financial literacy, I definitely know. I've been talking to one startup. Just give me a second. I'm thinking, who is this person and with whom I spoke, but I can tell you what they were doing. What they were doing was educating people how to spend better, and that's what they were doing. I will, if it comes to my mind, I will be happy to somehow share that information of which that startup was. But I definitely spoke with someone, and they were educating people how to spend better.
Yeah, so, and this was personalized. Share that with me. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, if it comes up.
Okay, we have another question. So the question is, do you have any example on how to include customers into lean product development more interactively?
Yes. So I've done that many times. And the short answer to that is that what we did, and I'm just giving you my example, is when, and we were a startup. So at that time when I was building that product, it was a startup, so it was much easier. But we had this, that we included in the product development, we included them as part of the product development. So we created, for example, a Slack And the customers were actually part of that, and they could give their feedback while we were building this product. So we were thinking, hey, this is a feature, do you want to try out? And they would come and say, okay, we can try this out, and give me what you think about it or how you feel about it. So it was a continuous process. We used Slack for that, where and they were actually constantly giving us feedback, telling us what their experiences are, and not like once in a month we just met. So it was more regular involvement. That's how we did it.
Okay, next question. What is different between AI learning and coding or programming?
AI learning and coding or programming? I need to understand a bit more, but if I understand what you're asking is, coding and programming is you're actually writing a code so that a system can learn, for example. If I understand what you're asking, that's the way I will answer is, learning is you write a piece of code for a machine to analyze the data, and by analyzing the data, it is learning. That's what I would understand.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can you touch upon onboarding options post-pandemic using AI technology?
Can I onboarding techniques post-pandemic?
Onboarding options post-pandemic using AI technology.
Okay, what does that mean? Onboarding options? Can the person elaborate a bit?
Okay, I can try to. Shiraz, can you hear us? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, can you elaborate a little on your question you sent to the Q&A?
Yeah, this is when you're onboarding new customers. With this social distancing and the new thinking that has come up with the pandemic, I believe banks will have to look at different ways of engaging the customer in terms of getting them onboarded, new customers into the bank. So is there any sort of techniques that AI involved processes can be built?
I mean, of course, the onboarding has to be digital and online, right? And the way you are doing it through a website and things. Perhaps one thing I didn't talk about it is I wrote about it quite elaborately in the article, is predicting your next customer. If you Google it, you can type it, predicting your next buyer. But what you could do, AI can help you identify, machine learning primarily can identify who would be your next customer.
Okay.
And unfortunately, sorry, I missed out that particular part of the in this presentation. But
right.
There are ways, there are simple models that you can train through classification, which will help you to identify who could be your next customer. And you could then use the right onboarding techniques, knowing who is your next customer and how to approach them. So you can, like, you might not perhaps know how to approach it because you may not have data about it from the past, but you definitely can utilize your existing data of your customers to identify who would be your next customers. And that is something I think some companies already use it. And if you just want to find that article, just in Google type predicting next buyer, I think, or next buyer behavior, and the first article should be mine. And I do briefly talk about that, how you could achieve it.
Right. Great. Thanks.
Thank you. We can continue to the next question. So, do you think that wide implementation of AI can change the organization, the structure of a bank?
Do I think that? I do not know. I do not think you need to change the structure. Why do you even need to change the structure of the bank? I think that the way we should see AI as a tool that you are building to help you create better interaction with your customers. I do not see there is a need to restructure the bank itself. But if someone can explain a bit more why there is a need to restructure the bank, I would be happy to hear. Hello, can you hear me, Karata?
Okay, so should I try to find the?
Yeah, I mean, if someone can explain me what is a structure of the bank. I mean, I personally do not see any need to do that, to be honest. I think that Of course, there are departments. The way if there is a need for structuring is how you are building the products. That's especially AI products. What you need to structure is not take AI away from the innovation department and not somewhere in the corner, but integrate as the product development, integrate as part of all the different departments, so that different departments are not working in silo. And again, this is something I've heard many times from many banks, that the different departments are working in silo. So it doesn't require a restructuring. What is required is how you're building the AI is not limited to a innovation department, but involving the different departments, and building something for the customers, taking to the and then only you can actually build something taking into account how users think, how customers think, because the information is not in one department. That information is spread. And that's why I also argue that it's not just about involving people to just come and sit and give a feedback, but that's the way you can help to retrain some of these employees. So maybe what I would approach, and it may be just possible, maybe not possible in some banks, but what I will create is create an incentive structure for different department people to say, hey, we are going to build this product. Do you want to be part of it? And as being part of it, what you also need to do is start learning these courses online, which are free, or even if $50 doesn't matter. And while you are learning this kind of new technology, and it's good for you to learn this new technology, you are also actually building the product. So this person brings this knowledge of the domain knowledge, but at the same time also is aware about what is machine learning and AI is all about. So then you create this kind of groups, which is bringing the people from different groups, and then you build the product. If that's restructuring, maybe, but to me, that's not restructuring.
Okay, thank you. Jaromir, do you have any questions to this? I think it was your question. No? Okay, so we can continue. So the next question, is AI a programming language, or is it a ready system to learn from existing data?
So it's not a programming language. A programming language is Python. That kind of, AI is, let's say, a set of algorithms. That's how you will say that there are different set of algorithms I initially pointed. And one of you remember the first, one of the first slides, there are different kinds of algorithms that you can apply in AI. One of the set of algorithms is machine learning, which is learning from data. So it's just the machine learning that is learning from data. The rest of them don't really rely on a lot of data to build learning.
Okay, next question. How to adapt the current models, machine learning, that the banks normally use with the crisis new data? Is it something new that we hadn't seen before and do not have similar data history?
I doubt that, actually, to be honest. I do not think, this is something depends on case to case, but I do not think that I think the changing of behavior is people are moving more towards online. People are more using apps, and people are more using games, things like that, and then you're creating this structure. But inherently, our human behavior doesn't suddenly change. We just using one way of using it changes to another way of using it. I do not think it would require you guys to retrain the model on the whole new data set. I think the new data set, of course, you are learning. You'll keep on learning from the new data that is coming in. But I do not think that will invalidate the previous models that you guys have, because so what my understanding from the current situation is that in the past, let's say a small group of people were using these tools, or you were using this thing, and who were whatever, maybe early adopters, and now a majority will be using it. Will the majority's behavior be vastly different from the early adopters' behavior of using it? I do not think so. I think that it will be just a bit changing, but I guess it will still validate the previous models.
Okay, next question. Current / post-pandemic times is a big challenge for companies using AI. Are their staff / systems able or skilled to twist or change their AI engines to this new reality fast?
Yeah, I think this is something, and that's why I spoke briefly about the retraining your employees in a bank, because one of the things that I want to reiterate to all of you is that AI and machine learning is nothing super complicated. It might sound very super complicated. Basically, these are a lot of this is basically tools, libraries that you can plug and play. That is what the state of a lot of machine learning and AI has been. Most of the real world use cases is kind of plug and play. You try this, you can try that. There are different kinds of tools like TensorFlow and things like that, and it's not that complicated. So I would say that it doesn't require even. I think within a month and two, someone can doing some learning through online courses can actually start building solutions. Of course, and then you bring this whole collaborative environment, and then you can learn from each other. But you don't have to necessarily. It doesn't require a very, very high sophisticated knowledge. You don't require PhDs for this, all of this. You don't need more than, you don't need years of experience for this. So I would suggest that yes, there's plenty of people out there. You just have to retrain yourself a bit, incentivize your employees to do that. And then your staff will be kind of able to use this kind of tools and models to build solutions. And it's something that, in fact, in the future, I would say, predict even in a few years' time, the programming part of AI will actually be even done by machines. So the programming itself will be done by machines. So it's not so much about programming tools. And this is so much tools are out there that you don't need a lot of, as I say, mathematical knowledge or even much mathematical knowledge to do any of those. The key is that you are able to learn this, you know what to do, where to use, and you have a domain knowledge. So yes, there's definitely a lot of people with the staff, and there's so much people who have done online courses and who have the knowledge. And I've worked with many. I'm giving this example from my personal experience. I've worked over the last 1 year over 900 people from 79 countries. And these are often people who have like less than a year of experience. And we ended up building very sophisticated machine learning models. So I'm aware that this doesn't require a lot of learning or education.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, do you have AI-based use cases for personalized pricing in banks?
Use cases. Do I have a personalized pricing use cases? I think that Ish Bank, and you can check it out because a lot of that is not known to me, but they have the right product for the right customers. And I do not know whether they are actually using the right pricing also. But I do know a startup I definitely know a startup that are using this technique. So they have something which they used is that some people are willing to pay more, some people are willing to pay less. And I remember this because I was mentoring this startup, and I had this doubt that whether you want to do that whether do you want to a segment of your users, you want to ask them to pay more or not. But what we realized that if you could provide an incentive, a discount, you don't kind of make people pay more, but what you could do is you can identify a group of segment of users and provide them a discount. And I think that model does exist. I mean, where you're discounting certain people based on certain criteria, so that you're incentivizing them to use that. And the criteria could be behavior-based. I don't remember any particular case in the banking industry, but I definitely know in the startup industry that exists. People use this kind of discounted pricing model for certain group of customers.
Okay.
Sorry, can you share the name of this startup?
I have to walk through all my contact list, but if you could let me know a bit later, just remind me, and I'll go through that and I will send it.
Okay.
Okay, we have a next question. What could be the input data required to machine learning to identify most buying customers to online channels / online banking?
So there is a notion, a lot of people think that this requires a lot of data. I mean, I cannot answer that question directly because I do not know whether it's thousands or hundreds, but to be honest, because it depends on the particular use case. But in general, I have built such models. There is a notion that you need to train the model a lot, which is not true. And I actually, also I didn't put part of the presentation, but there are ways you could train models to a decent accuracy, 90% accuracy with hundreds of data points. How could you do that? There are some algorithms like, where, let's say GANs is just an example I'm giving you, where even if you can deal with the insufficient data, and you can use certain other algorithms to fill up those insufficient data. So in our cases, we had used, where we had, in one of the cases, I had like few hundred data points 400 to 300, we used another algorithm, generated some data points more, and then we are able to train a model. But in general, I will say that you should be able to build a decently accurate model, and I say decent, like say 70, 80 to maybe even 90%, depending on the use case, with few hundred, like 500, 600, 700 data points. You don't need a lot. The data points, the challenge is when you want to reach from 90 to 95 or 95 to 99% or 99 to 100%. So these data where you really require a lot more learning. So and for example, another point that I will just there's something called transfer learning. So these are again algorithms that I'm transfer learning. What it does is you have a previously trained model, and you're applying, and that is trained on millions of data points, but on something else. And then you're using that model, and you're retraining only the last, let's say, the layer of the model. And I hope just carry on with me, just the last layer. And that doesn't require a lot of data. And then the model works on the new data points. So there are techniques to get over this kind of lack of data. But yeah, so basically I would say that in 400, 500, 600, on that kind of few hundred data points, you could get a decent accuracy with what you're doing.
Okay, we have last two questions. So the first one is, what are the challenges you see while using AI when it comes to workforce?
Using AI when it comes to workforce, it's quite a broad question, actually. Can the person elaborate what specific part of the workforce challenges he's talking about?
Well, it was from anonymous attendee, so
okay.
I can find him really.
So the question is, if the person can just unmute or just ask me once more, what are the challenges of the AI with workforce? I mean, I would understand that question as being layoffs. Are people going to lose their job? If that's the question they are referring to, then I would say there will be layoffs with or without this pandemic. With pandemic, maybe it will expedite a bit more. But I would say here is that I make this analogy that if your work is routine and boring, and you're repeating the same thing, then it's perhaps good for the machine to take over the job, and then you retrain yourself. That's why I primarily focus on the retraining part, on using other things and kind of new skills, and especially in the AI and machine learning field, you can actually retrain your skills within few months of time, where you can end up being quite a valuable in this new AI machine learning field, because most likely your knowledge of the domain knowledge will be very useful in these new products that banks and other companies are going to build. And so I would say that the challenge is, yes, AI will bring some challenges, but I think that the new opportunities are way more, or will be way more, if you take the opportunity to actually retrain yourself, and which is not that difficult to do in today's world.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, AI has an answer to known problems, but what if I didn't identify the problem? Can AI find problems where I didn't know there is one?
No, not to my aware. I mean, the basic, well, maybe in future we can build such systems which are super intelligent, but as I said, current algorithms are as, I will say them dumb as finding patterns in the data. And if, I mean, if there is a problem or not. So you can potentially look at, one of the things that you might be able to do is, let's say through unsupervised learning, you find certain patterns in the data that you are seeing, and you can perhaps identify a problem that that is in the data. I mean, let me think if I could come up with a case or not. Maybe nothing comes to my mind immediately, but in general, no. You start with a problem, and on my book, I kind of argue all the time is that one of the problems that a lot of banks, and not only banks, corporates, I've seen that what they do with AI is that they start with the data, and then they try to find what to do with the data. And I think that's a wrong approach. That is a wrong approach, because when you are starting with the data, you're already most likely starting with some biases in the data. And so whatever you're concluding from that will have bias. However, that's where the human involvement is so important. However, if you start with a problem that you already kind of trying to solve, and then you gather the data, and sometimes you may not have the data, so you have to find out where and how to overcome these problems, and then your system will be much more less biased. And that's why, for example, the Amazon systems, when they were using the CV only to recommend whom to hire, they only relied on the CVs, the data, and which was biased in itself, like in the past, the hiring process. So that's why I would, in fact, recommend you not to find problems from the data, often because data will have biases. Better to identify the problem and then think about what are the different sources of data that you might need to solve that problem.
Okay, thank you very much. So that was all from the questions we had. So I don't know, Rudradep, if you have anything more to say or...
No, I have nothing more.
Okay, so thank you all for attending the webinar. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Just to note, the presentation and also the recording will be available after the event. So thank you, Rudradep, for your valuable inputs, and I wish everyone a nice rest of the day.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.